Good morning, adventurers. I hope you guys slept well and welcome in my weary wanderers today. Oh boy, today's going to be a bit of a day. I knew this was coming, and we're just going to dive right in and go for it as we're going to talk about learning. So, a secret that I've been trying my best to hide from you guys is that I don't know everything. I wish I did know everything. I know a lot, but I don't know everything, and it's especially easy to spend a long period of time learning something new and then forget all of the nuance to something else I've already learned. It is for this reason I highly discourage anyone from being a solo game developer. Like, you should always be part of a team. You should try to work with other people because it's just too much for one person to do in a lot of ways. But here we are. So, uh, basically, where we left off was this. I was making a rig for a character to use in my game. Right. So I come in here, and this is what a rig looks like. This is what it is and what it does. And I can take any of these bones, and then the model would be applied to it, and then I could like pose it, kind of like a little action figure, and turn it into kind of whatever I want here, right? So that's what we're working on. In order to do this, right, I have for myself these this whole folder of documents that are just notes for how to do everything, right? And whenever I get lost and whenever I don't remember what I'm doing, I go back and I look at those notes. So over the weekend, I was working on this guy, and I went back to those notes, and they were in a mess. I don't know what on earth I was doing the last time that I was working on that document, but basically, it is just horrifying the state I left that document in. So I thought that today it would be fun to just talk about the learning process, and how to take notes for yourself and how to basically learn anything that you want to learn very quickly and efficiently. Um, so first thing about just doing this in general, right, is I want to point out that part of this process is largely unnecessary, right? Not only can you buy a rig for any, like, you can buy rigs like this, you can buy a humanoid rig just online, and there's lots of them, and there's free ones and there's expensive ones, and you can just go buy one, right? Not only could you just go buy one, but I've actually already made one. I've done this before. This was a rig I made for, this is the female mannequin for Unreal Engine 5. And it's already rigged. It's already here. I can grab. I can do stuff. We've got like whole things. The issue isn't making a humanoid rig, though. The issue is that, as simple as it is, there's I need to make rigs for other things. Oh my goodness, where did it go? As simple as it is, I need to make rigs for other things, right? And honestly, it was rigging this ghost that I was trying to do it quick and dirty. I was trying to do it just off the top of my head from memory, and it was not going super well. And so that sort of sparked this reignition of, oh, this is something that I don't know as well as I used to. It's not something I've done in a while. This is something that I need to revisit and relearn. So what we're going to be doing today is most of my rigging knowledge comes from a gentleman named Pierrick. Oh my goodness, I've already forgotten his name. Pierrick Picot, who I'll link some of his stuff later. Also, welcome. Thank you for coming in. Um, but that's where I learned most of my rigging. He's got a fantastic YouTube channel. I've bought a couple of his courses. They're absolutely fantastic. Um, and what we're going to be doing today is just going through and breaking down the like raw information from like sort of a teacher, if you will, And a teacher could be anything in this sort of process that we're going through. A teacher could be like an online YouTube tutorial. It could be a class. It could be like a legitimate person you're learning things from, maybe as like an apprenticeship or something like that. Any of those sorts of things. We're going to talk about how to have like essentially a source of information and then how to best go about learning that source of information. So, in order to do that, I believe I just have these two open here. I'm going to close this other one. Uh, boop boop. Don't save. Whoops. And then we'll just make a new document because you will see shortly here. So this is about rigging today, but specifically also just a tried and true process for learning anything it is that you may want to be learning. So first step is just showing off this document that I have here. So this is my massive 22-page document on rigging, right? And actually, you know what? Here, I'm sorry. Before I hop into this, because we're going to be spending a lot of time looking at this today. Before I hop into that, how should you go about learning things? Because it's a tricky thing. I remember in high school, I actually was fortunate enough to have a college professor come through and give this big old lecture on note taking, which surprised me a lot. I was not ready to think that I didn't understand how note taking worked. I wasn't ready to understand that just like the average person doesn't know how to retain information. Like it's a skill. Like most things are skills, and you can be better or worse at actually retaining information. So what is note taking, and where does it sort of fit into this world we live in where we can watch like online tutorials for whatever? Um, the basic gist of it is this, is that if you want to learn something and you're trying to learn it on your own and you're going through tutorials online in order to do so, my recommendation is to first watch a tutorial, no matter how long it is, from beginning to end, just letting the information wash over you, right? You don't need to take notes. You don't need to follow along. You don't even need to understand necessarily what it is the tutorial is trying to teach you, right? The first time you watch a tutorial, you should just let it all wash over you, because what you're doing is you're exposing yourself to a broad view of what it is you're going to be doing, right? It's tricky. If my girlfriend taught me knitting a while ago, right? And so I was learning to knit. Um, and the thing is that as I was learning to knit, it was tricky because I didn't have any because it was like a live in-person thing going on. I didn't have any context. I was like learning stitches and I was learning all these new things, but I didn't know that we were making like a hat, like a beanie. And so I just was kind of following along really blindly, and it was really, really hard to learn because I didn't understand what the big picture was of what it was that I was going to be learning or getting out of it, right? Once it sunk in that, oh, we're making a hat, like we're trying to make basically a dome, then everything was way, way, way easier because I was like, oh, I see why this connects like this, and I see why we're doing it that way, and so on and so forth. So if you're ever trying to learn something, you watch a tutorial, just watch it through from beginning to end the first time and just let everything wash over you. Then go back through and follow along and take notes for yourself, right? Take notes for yourself and basically write your own instruction manual so that you can follow through this again, right? And that's what we're going to be doing today is just going over my notes and how I break things down and how I go through the process of like documenting all of the information for myself. And then after that, try and do the thing it is that you're trying to do without going back to the tutorial. And that is the tricky part. And that's the thing that there's another game developer on YouTube called Prismatica Dev, and I'll link them as well. In fact, let me find those links now so I don't get distracted here. Um, so actually, real quick, Pierrick Picot. This is the first channel all about rigging. Great dude here. Where's the share button? Oh, here we go. Yep. Perfect. So that is the link for rigging in Blender, which is where I've learned most of my rigging. And then Prismatica Dev is here. Do. And then we'll send them as well. Perfect. There you go. So Prismatica Dev had a thing about how he learned Unreal Engine 4 in a very short amount of time, which was a great video. You can find it on his channel. And one of the things that he talks about is when people like do a tutorial, especially if you're trying, like you know kind of a bit of information that you're trying to get to or acquire. What a lot of people do is that they'll watch the tutorial, they'll follow along without absorbing any information, and then when they get to the end and they've made this product by following along, then they don't explore it anymore. They just sort of end there and you call it a day. Um, and that sucks because you didn't actually learn anything. You sort of like followed along as someone just sort of showed you, and then you use that and have gone on and didn't really learn anything. So as we go through this, right? Again, this is the part of the process where like taking notes and writing a document for myself so that I don't have to go back to a tutorial, right? Is that I watched the tutorial in theory just twice, right? And in both of those times, I actually learned the thing rather than just watching it, getting what I needed, and leaving, and then not retaining any of the information. So going back then, this is my big giant document. I have documents like this for all of the things. I have it for rigging, I have it for Unreal Engine, I have it for modeling, I have it for sound and music. Music is especially bad because I just haven't put as much time into music as I need to, and a bunch of other things. But this is my big document for rigging. In theory, it has all of the information that you could want or need for how to rig whatever it is you want to rig, right? Which is great. That's awesome. That's kind of the thing that I want to do. But for it seems like the last time I touched this document, what I was doing was I was going through, I was writing all this stuff. This is all fantastic knowledge. I wrote everything down here. I was able to follow this very easily. You could rig anything with this information, whether it be a human or a creature, or if you need to rig like a car or a wagon or something, non-humanoid or non-inanimate, right? All of this is good. And then it gets down to here, right? And it's at here at this point that I don't know what I was doing. I like what kind of weird crack drug thing. All of this is just a mess down here. And it sucks because as I was going through trying to recreate the rig for my humanoid character, and I got to this part, which is the part that I arguably need the most, I just didn't have any information that I could follow. So I messed up in both. I kind of remember what it's supposed to be, but I messed up in my documentation for myself in order to understand, right? Because the goal is for first you to have like an outside teacher, and then later you don't need that outside teacher anymore. You have like kind of your own supply of internal teacher things that you've learned. Um, and here I messed up that step really badly. So what we're gonna do is I'm going to go through because this is gonna happen at some point. For those of you who are joining in now, which also hello everyone. For those of you who are joining in now, at the very start of today, like when I click that start stream button, the first thing I said was that I don't know everything. I wish I did. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. And the thing is that as we get further and further along, cracks are going to show. Cracks where, like, hey, I just don't know this thing, but I can, and am in the middle of learning how to do that thing and learning how to take notes for yet another thing here. So, um, I thought showing off that process would be good today, is basically where I'm getting at with this. So, let's start talking a little bit about rigging in Blender, and then how that applies to these notes and what exactly it is I'm going to be taking for notes. So here, I've made a little layout, or actually here, let me actually backtrack just a moment for you. Um, the way rigging works is it's primarily broken down into, I shouldn't have closed that one file I had. Can I do, give me 1 second here. Uh, Can I do, so basically the way, oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong one. Thing I was saying is that when you break down a lot of these, any rig really, that's from very simple to all the way complex. The way you can think about a rig, and this is something that I would learn through watching the tutorials the first time without trying to follow along and without trying to take notes or anything like that, is rigs are primarily comprised out of mechanisms. That's what Perit calls them. A lot of people call them mechanisms. Different names in different programs, but the idea is that you take a small, simple interaction between a few bones, and then you insert that somewhere into your model and your layout for the bones in your rig. And what happens is, by taking several different small mechanisms, right, and compounding them and putting them all on top of each other, you can create really, really advanced behavior. So here, for example, for this foot rig, the whole thing is that I have a couple different things. For one is I have a bone which controls the inverse kinematics of the leg, so I can move the foot around and then the leg will solve and sort of figure out what it needs to do from there afterwards. And I can adjust those things. But then I have a whole other rig for the foot specifically, which controls the bend and sort of common things the foot does, right? So the mechanism which controls this movement, this sort of like leaning movement, that's one simple little mechanism, right? The thing is that it's stacked with another different mechanism that allows it to do this. And those things are stacked on top of mechanisms that allow it to roll like this, which is awesome, right? And then that is all stacked on top of this, which allows me to move it around. So rigs are made out of many different small mechanisms which are stacked together to create complex systems. So that's how rigging works. Now I can actually close this. Whoops. So back over here, the thing is that for my document, I have this little layout here for how a mechanism is made. So here's an example of just, I would want to have the name of a mechanism. That's something that I've given myself so that I can like remember it for future use. A description of how it functions, a little diagram, and this is the most important part, right? So in all of my previous note taking, I was trying to describe the relationships between these bones and everything using just words, which is part of the reason why this has all failed and crumbled and disintegrated into nothing. So I want to make very, very concise and useful images so I can actually see what it is I'm doing there. The bones that are required, any sort of relationships between those bones, and then any constraints as well. So going through, this is basically the format that I'm going to use in order to document the mechanisms of these bones and such. So basically, let's fire up the tutorial, and then I'm just going to describe rigging as I go along, convert that into notes, and then just see that process of going from one thing to the other. Which means that, and this is exciting, I get to put on the headphones. I haven't gotten to put on my gamer headphones for everybody yet, so yeah. Oh, man. Okay, so rigging. Let's take a look here and just start the process. So I'm going to open up here I have a blank blender scene. And I probably should start by adding in a bone. I'm going to look at it from the side here. I'm going to turn on all of the things that you would need to see, which is the names and the axes of the bone. Set it so that it rotates around individual origins, like such. Um, Fix that. Perfect. And now what we're going to do is basically go through and I will be watching a tutorial, right? So there is a tutorial going on in the sort of other side of the screen now, um, which I don't want to show quite what that is because it is one of Parik's tutorials, and I would feel very, very bad about showing someone else's tutorial that I paid for free on a stream. That doesn't feel like good taste. But we can see about going through. Oh, you don't see nothing there. Um, ah, ah. And learning just how I break down these relatively complex things. So, lots of just chilling today, lots of going through. This is basically what it looks like to watch and document from a tutorial, is the plan. Now, one of the first things about bones and just rigs in general for your knowledge, right, is, and I described this last time, but one of the important things is that there are certain bones and several bones within the body or within a rig that need to be oriented to world space. So here we can see I've got a, goodness, I've got an x-axis that goes along like this, a y-axis that goes along like this, and a z-axis that goes up and down like such. And it's important that my bone, you can see I've got these axes turned on here. So I've got the X, the Z, and the Y. It's important that those are aligned to the same sort of orientation as world space for certain bones, because essentially what you want to have happen is when I move the bone in the positive X axis, then it moves in the positive X axis. If I were to rotate this just 90 degrees, maybe, please. Oh, probably. There we go. If I were to rotate this 90 degrees like such, now the issue is that when I move the bone in its local x-axis, what's going to happen, let me turn this on to local, and let me turn on my little widgets here, because that'll be the easiest. Now, when I move it in its... It's being naughty. It's trying to think it's smarter than it is. Anyway, the point is that when I move it now in its like local x-axis, the problem is that it's going to move not in the world x-axis. It's going to move vertically up in the world axis. So it just we'll figure out more as we're going along, right? Back to tutorial here. And again, I'm sorry you can't hear anything. Dim bones. All right, so the first mechanism, I'm going to sort of fast forward through the tutorial here because I have watched it already, right? And this is basically what he's explaining. Ah, yes. So this is the first bone that I want to use, or the first mechanism that I want to use. And the mechanism is essentially a way to deal with the fact that some bones, or all bones, rotate based off of what's called the head of the bone. So this is what a bone in 3D looks like, right? And it has two ends. One end is the head. That's going to be this end over here. And over here, this is the tail, right? And the issue is that bones will always rotate in pose mode from the head of the bone, right? So here, just without any other sort of button pressing, when I rotate the bone, it is rotating from here. If I scale it, it'll also scale from there, and so on and so forth. And that works great most of the time. However, There are some situations in which you need to maintain the hierarchy of a bone. However, the bone is not facing the correct direction. So, what do you do? Well, there is an option here. So, I'm going to take this bone and I'm going to duplicate it. And then there should be a flip or, I'm sorry, reverse. Um, Somewhere is a thing that lets you flip the direction of the button or of the button of the bone. Bone settings. And I can't remember because it's not called flip anymore. It used to be called flip. But now it is called something else. Unless it is still called flip. No, flip is still flip names. Reverse. Um, Switch direction. Oh my goodness. This is like a giant game of play the thesaurus. So switch direction. And now I have two bones. One which is facing like such, and one is facing the other direction. And what this will let me do is basically change the point at which this bone rotates. So just breaking down this mechanism here, let's see what we got. I believe what it is. Okay. Going to duplicate one more bone here, just sort of following along again. So, and I'll rename these in just a moment to sort of elucidate the mechanism that we're making. Alrighty. And then this will be called probably inverted bone. And I'm debating about if there is a way. Probably. In theory, the length of these shouldn't matter. So if I do scale 0.5 and I take this and I do scale 0.5, in theory that should, or you know what I could do as well? Scale 2, pull that up. So this is the original bone, the inverted bone, and then the mechanism controller. So if I do this correctly, right? This is the original bone, and this needs to be parented to like such, and then this is like such. So the thing is that we have this bone here, which is going to be the deformation for our 3D model, right? And we can't change this direction without radically changing and messing up our deformation, right? And that's sort of the issue, if you will. But by doing a setup like this, right? So here I've got the original bone. This is the one that I want to change the direction of, right? And here I've got an inverted bone, which because the original bone is parented to the inverted bone, it now rotates from this other point, which is great and fantastic and what we wanted ultimately. And then this is also all parented to a controller for the mechanism as a whole. So we took a bone which had a sort of fixed rotation point, and we simply flipped that rotation point down to the other end, which is super awesome. So this is a thing, for example, then. Let me bring this down here. where I'm going to take this, and then this is what I'm going to clip for my notes in said document, right? Now, as a cool note, just about using Windows and stuff like that, I'm sure that if you are on Apple operating system or Mac OS or something like that, there is some other shortcut that you can use. But here in Windows land, if you hold down the Windows key, and I don't know if this will necessarily appear on stream, but if you hold down the Windows key and then press Shift S, what you'll get is something called like it's the Windows clip tool. And what it does is it lets you take a screenshot, but instead of being a full screen screenshot, it's just a small segment. So here I took a little tiny, oh, pardon me, capture of that. And let's go ahead and make, this is supposed to be my inverted bone here. So I'm going to call this inverted bone, and I'm going to label it outdated, right? So that I know that this is what I was taking for the notes before, because maybe I can still use this information, right? But I want to revitalize it. And then I'm going to come up to this whole section up here, and I'm going to take all of this, I'm going to copy, and come down to inverted bone, and I'm just going to paste that right in front of it. So boom. Here, and I'll call this inverted bone. I'm going to leave the description. I can do that later. But this is probably the most important part. And now I can press oops. Oh, and because I did this out of order, because I pressed Control Copy and did a new thing, I have to go take a picture again. So I'm so sorry. Let's do that real quick. So here's my picture of my diagram. And now I can do that. Perfect. And this works out much better because now I have, instead of, for all of these other things, like I was literally trying to describe an image like this. And I don't know how you would go about describing an image like this, but it's an absolute nightmare. So by doing it this way, I just have a much more clear indication of what it is I'm talking about. So here I've got mechanism controller, followed by original bone, and then inverted bone. And then here in this little section that I have, this is actually a table. And as a fun note, if any of you are using Google Docs or anything like that, you can actually change the table border to something like 0, and that will simply hide the table. So here, that's what we've got. I wonder, can I take it down to just very thin? No. Anyway, so this describes all of the child-parent relationships. So the original, oh, come on. Original bone is the child, specifically of inverted bone. And let me, there we go. Original bone, inverted bone. And then we've got another one, which is inverted bone, is the child of, my goodness, mechanism controller. And fortunately, there are no bone constraints for this. So this is all very techie Blender stuff. Oh, and I might actually, while I'm here, I will say, for example, right? I'll write a little blurb about how this is very, very useful for the hips specifically. So the idea behind this, and you know what? I'm actually going to go back. I'm so sorry for the detours here. I'm going to go back and I'm going to open up probably that file again. Yes, just like this. So the issue here, right, is that the bones laid out in this particular rig, and I might just keep this open and refer to this rig regularly throughout this process. I don't know how long we'll do this because I don't think I'm hammering home a point that is needs to be this elaborate. But so here I've got hips, right? And the thing is that if I were to hide, there should be viewport display, um, custom shape, right? Is if I were to hide this bone, maybe not even this one. There's probably some in some layer somewhere. But the point is that this bone is oriented in such a way that its base rotation is somewhere right in here, right? And that doesn't work because your hips don't rotate from that point. They rotate from a point much farther up, like at the top of your pelvis, where your sort of iliac crests are, and then where your spine at the lumbar connects to your sacrum, right? That's where your hips like to rotate from. But again, because the deformation bone, the bone that actually affects the mesh, is not oriented that way, we needed some kind of mechanism in order to flip it around, right? So just going back to note taking in general, and then note taking and how it applies to using this, right? Here I'll say like uh, useful for hips, and I'll expand on that later. Useful for hips, to change the I'm doing it now. Def deformation bone from its default orientation to orientation, a more favorable one. Cool. Anyway, so the thing is that and then this is like again just a breakdown of the process as a whole, right? Is looking back, I had a situation where I know, just having from watched these tutorials before, that there is a problem you can encounter when creating the hips for a character, right? And that very specific problem is just that it doesn't have the correct rotation point. So, what to do about that? Well, I remember, right, from just sort of vague understanding, is that there's something to do with flipping bone direction. But I don't necessarily remember all the nuance and all the details of how it is that is supposed to work. So, in my notes for myself, right, in my note taking here, I've created this whole little thing so that I can quickly reference this and remember how that particular mechanism is supposed to work. And something that I didn't have before, and something that I encourage you to use, is use whatever tools you need to in order to actually document things for yourself. So in this case, images work fine for me, and I'm in like a very specific document taking a lot of time. This is covered, by the way, in like Parik's tutorial, in like 45 seconds. Like in 45 seconds, he's like, here, let's do this, right? But I'm taking minutes and minutes, if not tens of dozens of minutes, in order to do this whole thing about like I have a description, I have a little diagram, I have a full breakdown of all of the components and stuff like that. The good news is that if I do this process throughout everything, right? If I ever forget, if I ever need to quick reference something, if I'm ever in a situation where I don't know, like I know that I vaguely need to do this, but I don't remember how, the goal is that I do not need to go through and I do not need to sift through these tutorials again, right? I can reference this document, I made it, I know what it's doing, I know what it's got going on, and I can simply get back to here and see what it is, the information that I need, right? And on the topic of just learning things in general, um, I cannot tell you or stress enough how sort of important this is. It really does free up a lot of just time and energy and stuff like that to know that I've gone through this process in such a way that I have this information at my fingertips. And specifically, it's the information that I know my brain needs, right? And that's one of the issues with a lot of tutorials is that with tutorials in general, with like instructive things in general, is as it's presented by a person, they tend to highlight whatever they feel is most important, right? And for the person learning, the things that are most important might be different, right? So this is the information that I know I would need in order to recreate this, right? And just from a sort of base point of view, that is useful to me and me alone. So we'll go through. I think we'll make one more little mechanism here, and then that might be the stream for today. I don't know, because I don't think that there's necessarily a tremendous amount of nuance to this, but just going through, showing how I do it, showing off some rigging in Blender seems like a fun time. So let's see the next rig that he's going to be making here. And I believe what it is a somewhat fancy, yes, something I was calling the two bone stem. So the way this guy works is I can now go back into here. So this is my whole sort of inverted bone layout, right? I'm going to get rid of all this. We'll get rid of this. We'll get rid of this. Make sure that this has no parent for the moment. So this is what was I calling it again? The two bone stem. So let's take a look at how this guy works, right? As just a different thing that I need to learn and document for myself. The idea here is that if I've got two bones, something like this, right? And let's say I want to bend them, kind of like if you had maybe like a flower stem or something like that, in such a way that they kind of curve over, right? This works for a lot of things and is a really, really great example of something to use in a simplified torso. The issue with it, and there are notes to be had, is it only works for two joints. And it's, oops. So we'll do this like this. And basically what it is there are no parents in this situation here. I might actually make one more bone and I'll do R90 like this. So I'll call this mechanism controller. Okay. And I'll call this chain base. Call this chain end. And then finally, we'll have this bone, which is the stem controller, right? So just as far as rigging mechanisms go, the idea behind this one, and I remember it already, I didn't need to watch much of the tutorial, which is awesome, is that this is parented to what would be the root of your mechanism and your rig, right? This is connected to the chain base, so it is parented as such. This is parented to the mechanism controller here. This is parented to the mechanism controller. So now if I move the controller around, this whole thing moves as well. And then the way this guy works is in pose mode. You do have to apply these things in pose mode. So I'm going to select this, I'm going to select that, and I'm going to do copy rotation. Right, so now if I move this, we see that the two bones on the other side sort of follow along. The thing is that you can take this, and you can do copy rotation on top of this as well. And what happens now is, these would probably need to be both in local space is the issue here. So local to local and local to local. So now what we can see is now there's sort of a different kind of interaction going on. And what's happening is those two bones, because they both have a copy rotation applied to them, what's happening is when I rotate the first one, right, this bone, oh my goodness, give me the correct lasso. This bone here is following and copying the rotation of this bone, which is awesome and fantastic. The thing is that's being added to this bone, which is doing the same thing and copying the rotation of that. And the reason why this is called the two bone stem rather than the three bone stem is because I believe, and let's see if this is still the issue, right? Is if I go into edit mode and I pull out one more bone, just in case, we'll see here, and I do the exact same thing to this last one, copy rotation, what should happen, oh, and I'm sorry, world to world space, or I mean local to local space, is it gets weird and the length changes. Although, interestingly, it seems to not be doing that. This used to be an issue in Blender. I don't know if it still is. Um, but that's actually really cool. It used to be that for some reason this would cause some wild problems down here. So actually, this is probably a great way to create any sort of bendy chain. Um, and noted on that essentially. So I have this. We'll get rid of the chain end. Go back to edit mode. Boom, boom, bones. So I learned something new, right? Something that is different in modern Blender versus old Blender. So that's good. That's something I can write down. But the other thing is now I have a new sort of simplified system for seeing, okay, this is how this thing works. So I'm going to do the same thing as before. So I'm going to go back to my document. I'm going to go up to this sort of template note thing that I made for myself here. Two bone stem. We'll post this again, and then I'll call this two bone. Oh no, two bone stem outdated. Perfect. And then we'll make my little sort of clip of what it is supposed to look like. Do diagram. We'll paste this here. Perfect. So this is now my diagram of the two bone stem and how it is supposed to work. So I'll go in and I'll name this two bone stem. And then go through and list my bones here. So I've got the mechanism controller, chain base, chain end, and then stem controller. And then you go through and fill out the rest of the information. So all in all, these are the notes that I'm taking for myself. So going back to just learning tutorials and good ways to absorb information, ideally, with all of this filled out, given like a proper description, a proper example of where it's used in the body, a proper example of just sort of everything, right? I don't need to refer to the tutorial anymore. I can refer to my own notes. And not only that, the thing with my notes in particular is that it's much quicker and much easier to find the information I need because I've cataloged it in such a way, as such a format that I already know where that information is, right? Here I can see like, oh, I don't remember what this does. I've already made a little description for myself. I don't remember quite what it's supposed to look like. Here I have an example of it laid out plainly for myself. And so on and so forth. So for learning anything, my recommendation is to again go through sort of the following process here, which is first you watch or go through a class, do whatever, and just let all of the information wash over you, right? Don't follow along, don't take notes, just try and get a broad idea of what it is that you are trying to learn from something. Once you have that understanding, that sort of big picture of like, oh, this is the thing that I'm trying to understand, then go through it again, and the second time follow along, take notes, and take notes specifically in a way that it gives you the information that you need, right? Um, if you need to know like important dates, if you need to know processes, if you need to know relations, if you need to know keyboard shortcuts, whatever it is you're trying to learn, and whatever information is prevalent that you feel you are liable to forget, right? That's the stuff that you should take notes on. And then once you have your notes, try and do the thing, try and experiment with the thing, but only use your notes. Try not to go back to the source material. Try to use just your hand built guide for yourself in order to cover the information again. So, having said all of that, probably what I'll do is I'm going to go through and finish this tonight and remake all of my notes, right? Um, the good news is I might actually share this whole bit of notes with my wanderers, or I'm sorry, my adventurers on Patreon. So if any of you want an example, because you should make your own, but if you want an example document of just several different mechanisms for rigging and how they can be used without a model, that'll be available for adventurers. And then we'll sort of apply this hopefully in a finished rig tomorrow. So I can go through and quickly put everything together and just show how the rig works and show some of these mechanisms within the body, which I think will be really, really cool. I won't be doing any custom shapes. That process takes way too long. We'll just be doing stuff like this, but you can see sort of as a fun reference where the complexity and note-taking of today gets boiled down into a very, very simple um, self-made guide for tomorrow. So that's sort of the plan. And I think that's probably where I'll call it today. So today is going to be a short stream, but thank you guys for coming in. This is sort of my life for a while. And if you want to learn anything, this is something I recommend. So you guys have a good night. I will see you at the same that time tomorrow, and we'll show sort of the fruits of this labor. It's kind of boring, but it's useful. You'll see. You guys have a good